Minister Miller, this throne speech sounded pretty familiar. A plan to implement legislation on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, an action plan to address the crisis on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. So why should people be hopeful these issues will be addressed during this minority government?
Well, it's important to remember that we had a very important speech from the throne a year ago, and the commitments made towards Indigenous peoples in the chapter from the throne are those that continue, and that was reiterated in this speech from the throne only a year later. What has been clear is that during the global pandemic that has touched Indigenous peoples and brought to light the inequities and the socioeconomic gaps that exist, and as part of my mandate to close, is there are some things we got to move more quickly on. And conscious of the fact that we're still trying to keep people alive and we don't know exactly where COVID will rear its ugly head, and conscious of the fact that, in fact, there are 100 active cases in Indigenous communities, and that has to remain our priority, we still can move proactively to address some of these issues that have been exacerbated by the pandemic. And I think immediately on issues of systemic racism, reforming the RCMP, ensuring that policing is treated as an essential service, where that concept of essential service is taken for granted in non-Indigenous communities and reformed in the right way is key. Moving quickly on the infrastructure gap that continues to exist and continues to create those inequities that put Indigenous communities behind the ball when the pandemic broke out and continue to be more vulnerable, although now there are more tools to combat COVID. It is still something that is very raw and still something that needs to be remedied in an expeditious fashion.
But these were issues that were being worked on prior to the pandemic, prior to the past throne speech a year ago.
Yes, absolutely. And, what immediately comes to mind is Grassy Narrows and Wabaseemoong, two communities that have been suffering from the effects of mercury poisoning. And despite this pandemic, we've been able to engage respectfully with the community and agree to fund mercury treatment centers in those communities and build that infrastructure despite a global pandemic. A lot of that work remains to be done, and a lot of those priorities can be done simultaneously, but there is no denying that obviously things have slowed down as communities have shut down and focused on their pandemic plans and focused on keeping their people safe. But we need to be able to, as we see the course of this epidemic charting across in ways that we can't necessarily predict, we need to be able to move and go back to a more surgical approach in risk management and ensuring that we can get those resources into communities and ensure that we support them through this new normal by investing in resources, financial, medical, and otherwise, and ensuring that they have the resources to make the decisions that they need to make to keep their people safe and to keep closing that socioeconomic gap, which our indicators are showing are closing, but not at the rate that we would like to see.
One of the 4 priorities of the throne speech that was also in last year's throne speech includes walking the road of reconciliation. What does that mean? Because I think many people believe the federal government hasn't been walking that road.
Well, what we've become painfully aware of as a government is that the road to reconciliation is neither linear nor easy, and a lot of the promises that we made remain to be delivered on because there is decades of wrongdoing, and I think about the work that needs to be done, but done in the right way, done with engagement, done through listening, done through recognizing rights that have been inherent and haven't been crystallized in Canadian law. We see a painful example of that playing out on the eastern shores of Canada and Nova Scotia with treaty rights that have existed since the 1760s that have yet to be defined in law, and people's lives are being put at risk as a result. There are many iterations of that will continue to go on. But what I think I find heartening as the minister in this government is that the Prime Minister and the civil service are dedicated to moving forward, in the face of billions of dollars of investment being put into communities with results that we can show tangible, but with the acknowledgement that much more work needs to be done. And that dedication by the government, by my government, is something that I'm very proud of, but we know that there is much more work to be done, and done in a way that respects Indigenous rights.
Minister, we'll have to leave it there. Indigenous Services Minister Marc Miller, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.